The cry of her baby pierced the silence of the desolate cabin as Catherine Winters pressed her back against the rough-hewn wall, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. 3 days without food, and the milk in her breasts was drying up along with her hope. Outside, the unforgiving Wyoming Territory wilderness of 1878 offered nothing but the howling wind and the distant howls of wolves that seemed to mock her desperate situation. Catherine glanced at the empty cupboards once more, knowing full well nothing had materialized since she'd checked an hour ago. 6-month-old Emma's cries grew more insistent, her tiny face red with hunger and frustration. Catherine lifted her daughter from the makeshift crib little more than a drawer lined with her last clean clothing and held her close, rocking gently. "Hush now, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Mama will figure something out, I promise." But the truth was, Catherine had no idea what to do. Thomas had left 3 weeks ago, promising to return with supplies from Clearwater, the nearest town some 15 miles away. "3 days, Kitty," he'd said with that confident smile that had once made her heart flutter. 4 at the most. When a week passed with no sign of him, Catherine knew something was wrong. When 2 weeks passed, she began to ration their meager supplies. And now, at 3 weeks, with the last of the food gone and her strength fading, she faced the horrifying possibility that Thomas might never return. The thought of her husband lying dead somewhere along the trail made her chest constrict with grief, but there was no time for mourning. Emma needed her. Without Thomas, without food, and without the means to travel to town with an infant, Catherine was trapped. A sudden knocking at the door startled her so badly she nearly dropped Emma. Catherine froze, clutching her baby tighter. No one ever came this way. Their homestead was too remote, too far from the trail. Fear gripped her. Indians, outlaws, either could mean death. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Hello, anybody home?" A deep male voice called out, the accent distinctly southern. Catherine hesitated, weighing her options. If she remained silent, perhaps the stranger would leave. But if he meant harm, he could easily break down the flimsy door, and if he was a traveler with food to spare. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude, but I heard a baby crying. Everything all right in there?" The genuine concern in the stranger's voice made Catherine's decision. Keeping Emma close to her chest, she approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Name's Francis Sullivan, madam. I'm just passing through, heading to Clearwater. Thought I heard a baby and, well, couldn't just ride on by without checking." Catherine unlatched the door with trembling fingers and opened it just enough to peer out. The man standing on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and kind blue eyes beneath the brim of a dusty brown hat. True to his word, he had a horse tethered nearby, and in his arms he held a large burlap sack. "Mrs.," he prompted gently. "Winters," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Winters." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Winters," Francis said, tipping his hat. His gaze fell to Emma, who had quieted momentarily at the sight of the stranger. "Beautiful baby you got there." "Thank you," Catherine replied automatically, the politeness ingrained despite her desperate situation. Francis shifted the sack in his arms. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but you seem like you might be in a bit of trouble. Where's your husband?" Catherine swallowed hard. "He went to town 3 weeks ago. He hasn't returned." The cowboy's expression darkened briefly before he masked it with a smile. "Well then, it's a good thing I came along when I did." He held up the sack. "I've got some provisions to spare, flour, beans, jerky, even some coffee. Would you allow me to share them with you?" The kindness in his offer nearly broke Catherine's composure. Pride warred with desperation in her heart, but Emma's well-being won out. She opened the door wider. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Sullivan." Francis stepped inside, his tall frame making the small cabin seem even smaller. He placed the sack on the rough-hewn table and began unpacking its contents. A small sack of flour, dried beans, jerky, coffee, and even a precious jar of preserved peaches. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it should keep you going for a spell." Catherine stared at the food, unable to believe her eyes. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, suspicion temporarily overriding her gratitude. Francis's smile was gentle. "My ma raised me to believe that helping folks in need isn't charity, it's just being human." He glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings and the obvious signs of hardship. "If you don't mind my asking, have you got any neighbors nearby, anyone who might help?" Catherine shook her head. "The nearest homestead is over 5 miles away. The Parkers, they're good people, but they have 5 children of their own and barely enough to get by." Francis nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'm heading into Clearwater. I could ask around about your husband, send help back." Hope flared in Catherine's chest, but she tamped it down. "That's very kind, but no buts, Mrs. Winters. You've got a child to think about." Francis's voice was firm but gentle. "I'll be back in 2 days, 3 at the most, with news and more supplies." Catherine wanted to believe him, but Thomas had made the same promise. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate your kindness, but I've learned that promises out here are as fragile as morning frost." Francis's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Fair enough. Then don't consider it a promise, consider it a fact." "I will return." There was something in his steady gaze that made Catherine want to trust him despite everything. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Francis tipped his hat again. "In the meantime, you should eat something. You look like you're about to fall over, if you don't mind my saying so." Catherine couldn't argue with that assessment. She felt lightheaded with hunger. With Emma balanced on her hip, she reached for a piece of jerky, tearing off a small bite. The salty flavor exploded on her tongue, and she had to restrain herself from devouring the entire piece at once. Francis busied himself at the stove, lighting a fire and putting on a pot of coffee. "When was the last time you had a proper meal, Mrs. Winters?" Catherine chewed slowly, savoring the food. "A few days ago. I've been saving what little we had for Emma." Francis's expression darkened again. "And your milk?" The bluntness of the question might have embarrassed her under different circumstances, but survival had a way of stripping away social niceties. "Running dry. She's been crying more than usual." He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "The coffee will help with that, and so will getting some food in you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've also got some dried mint. My sister swears by it for increasing her milk when she was nursing her little ones." Catherine accepted the pouch with murmured thanks, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You seem to know a lot about babies for a cowboy," Francis chuckled. "7 sisters, madam. I'm the only boy, learned more than I ever wanted to know about babies and women's troubles." For the first time in weeks, Catherine felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward, not quite a smile, but close. "7 sisters, your poor mother, that's what Pa always said." Francis poured the coffee into the single chipped mug on the shelf and handed it to her. "Drink up. It'll put some warmth back in you." Catherine accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. Coffee had been a luxury she'd foregone weeks ago, saving the last of their supply for Thomas. The thought of her husband sent a fresh wave of grief through her. Francis seemed to sense her mood shift. "Mrs. Winters, I don't want to give you false hope, but I also don't want you giving up. There could be 100 reasons your husband hasn't returned that don't involve the worst." Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She sipped the coffee, its warmth spreading through her body, awakening parts of her that had begun to grow numb with despair. Francis moved toward the door. "I should get going if I want to reach Clearwater before nightfall. Will you be all right until I return?" With food in her belly and the promise of help, Catherine felt a flicker of the strength that had once defined her. "Yes, we'll manage now. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Truly." "Francis, please," he said, his smile warming his weather-beaten face. "Mr. Sullivan was my father, and he was a much more respectable man than I am." "Francis," Catherine repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Catherine." He tipped his hat one final time. "Catherine, I'll see you in 2 days." As Francis mounted his horse and rode away, Catherine stood in the doorway with Emma in her arms, watching until he disappeared into the vast Wyoming landscape. She didn't know if he would keep his word. Men's promises had proven fragile in her experience, but for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. True to his word, Francis returned exactly 2 days later. Catherine had been watching the horizon since dawn, Emma cooing in her lap, both of them nourished by the food he had left. When she spotted the cloud of dust in the distance, her heart leapt, then immediately constricted with anxiety. What news would he bring of Thomas? As Francis approached, Catherine could see his horse was laden with supplies far more than before. Behind him trailed a second horse pulling a small cart. Relief and curiosity mingled in her breast as she stepped out onto the porch to greet him. "You came back," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Francis dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "I told you I would." His smile faded as he approached, his expression growing serious. "Catherine, I need to talk to you about your husband." The gravity in his tone sent ice through her veins. "What did you find out?" Francis removed his hat, a gesture of respect that told her everything before he spoke a word. "There was a robbery at the general store in Clearwater 3 weeks ago. The shopkeeper was killed and the sheriff formed a posse to go after the outlaws." He paused, his blue eyes filled with compassion. "Your husband was there making purchases. He joined the posse?" "That sounds like Thomas," Catherine whispered. "Always wanting to help." Francis nodded. "The posse caught up with the outlaws near the Blackstone Ridge. There was a gunfight." He hesitated again. "I'm sorry, Catherine, Thomas didn't make it," though she had suspected as much. Hearing the words aloud struck Catherine like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and Francis quickly stepped forward to steady her, his strong hands gripping her arms. "I'm so sorry," he said again, his voice rough with genuine sympathy. Catherine clutched Emma tighter, the baby sensing her distress and beginning to whimper. How did you find this out?" "The sheriff told me. They buried Thomas in the Clearwater Cemetery. I paid my respects on your behalf." Francis's hands remained on her arms, solid and reassuring. "The sheriff also told me that Thomas spoke of you and the baby before they rode out. Made sure everyone knew where you were in case." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but a strange calm had settled over her. Perhaps she had done her grieving in the weeks of uncertainty, or perhaps the reality had yet to fully sink in. "Thank you for telling me," she managed, "and for coming back." Francis gave her arms a gentle squeeze before releasing her. "There's more you should know. The town took up a collection for you. Thomas was well liked, it seems. It's not much, but it's enough to get you through the winter if you're careful." He gestured to the cart. "I've brought supplies, food, firewood, some clothing for you and the little one." Catherine stared at the cart, overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Francis assured her. "But we do need to talk about what you're going to do now. Winter's coming, and it's no time to be alone out here with a baby." The reality of her situation hit Catherine anew. Thomas was gone. She was alone in the wilderness with an infant and winter approaching. The nearest town was 15 miles away. Even with supplies, how would she survive? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. "This was Thomas's dream, not mine. I followed him out here because I loved him, but I never wanted this life." Francis nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The sheriff mentioned that the stagecoach line is hiring a cook and housekeeper for their way station in Clearwater. It's not glamorous work, but it comes with room and board for you and Emma." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "Do you think they'd hire me?" "I already spoke to the station manager," Francis said. "He's willing to give you a chance, especially given your circumstances, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Catherine prompted. "But the position starts in a week, and you'd need to be in Clearwater by then. I can help you pack up whatever you want to take and escort you to town, but we'd need to leave tomorrow or the next day at the latest." Catherine looked back at the cabin, the home she and Thomas had built together, the place where their dreams had taken root and withered. What was left for her here but memories and hardship? "I'll go," she decided, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "There's nothing for Emma and me here now." Francis's relief was palpable. "I think that's wise. We can leave tomorrow if that gives you enough time to gather your things and say your goodbyes." Catherine nodded, her mind already cataloging the few possessions worth taking. Thomas's pocket watch, their wedding photograph, Emma's christening gown, The rest could stay with the cabin. Perhaps another family would find use for it someday. "I'll help you sort through everything," Frances offered, "and I brought some crates for packing." "Thank you," Catherine said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Frances's smile returned, gentle and reassuring. "You don't owe me anything, Catherine. Like I said, my ma raised me right." As they worked together through the afternoon, packing Catherine's life into crates and preparing for the journey to Clearwater, Catherine found herself studying Frances when he wasn't looking. He was older than Thomas had been, probably in his mid-30s to her 24 years. His face was tanned and lined from years in the sun, but handsome in a rugged way. His hands were calloused but gentle as he handled her few treasured possessions with care. More than his appearance, though, it was his character that impressed her. He worked tirelessly, never complaining, and seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. When Emma grew fussy, he fashioned a makeshift swing from rope and a blanket, hanging it from a ceiling beam and gently pushing it to keep the baby content while Catherine continued packing. "You're good with her," Catherine observed as Frances cooed at Emma, making the baby giggle. He shrugged, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Like I said, lots of nieces and nephews. Babies are simple, really. They need food, warmth, and someone to make silly faces at them." Catherine laughed, a rusty sound she barely recognized as her own. "I wish it were that simple." "It is and it isn't," Frances conceded. "Raising them right, that's the hard part, but loving them, that's as natural as breathing." The simple wisdom in his words touched Catherine deeply. Here was a man who understood what mattered in life. As the sun began to set, they had most of Catherine's belongings packed and ready for the journey. Frances insisted on sleeping in the barn to give her privacy for her last night in the cabin, despite Catherine's protests that he could take Thomas's side of the bed while she and Emma took hers. "Wouldn't be proper," he said firmly. "I'll be fine in the barn, got my bedroll, and it's hardly the worst place I've slept." Catherine didn't argue further, sensing his mind was made up. After a simple supper of beans and salt pork that Frances prepared, she retired to the cabin with Emma, leaving Frances to bank the fire and see to the horses. Alone in the small space that had been her home for nearly 2 years, Catherine felt the weight of her grief finally descend. Thomas was gone. Her husband, Emma's father, the man whose dreams had brought them to this wilderness, would never return. She allowed herself to weep then, quietly so as not to disturb the sleeping baby, mourning not just Thomas but the future they had planned together. When her tears were spent, Catherine found her thoughts turning to Francis Sullivan. What kind of man went so far out of his way to help strangers? She had met good people before, but his level of kindness and dedication seemed extraordinary. A cynic might question his motives, but Catherine had looked into his eyes and seen nothing but sincerity there. Morning came too quickly. Catherine woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a disorienting moment she thought Thomas had returned. Reality crashed back as Emma stirred beside her, reminding her of all that had happened and all that was to come. Frances had breakfast waiting when she emerged from the cabin, Emma on her hip. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the food. "Figured we could use a good meal before hitting the trail." "It smells wonderful," Catherine said truthfully. Her appetite had returned with her hope, and the bacon sizzling in the pan made her mouth water. They ate in companionable silence, the gravity of the day's journey hanging between them. When they finished, Frances cleared the dishes while Catherine nursed Emma one last time in the cabin. "Take your time," Frances called from outside. "I'll finish loading the cart and get the horses ready." Catherine looked around the cabin as Emma fed, memorizing the details of the place where she had known both profound joy and devastating sorrow. The rough-hewn walls Thomas had built with his own hands. The small window where she'd watched for his return countless times. The corner where Emma had been born on a stormy night last spring with only a neighboring farmer's wife to help. "We're starting a new chapter, little one," she whispered to her daughter. "It won't be easy, but we'll make it, I promise." When she finally emerged from the cabin, Frances had everything ready. The cart was loaded with her possessions, and both horses were saddled and waiting. "I thought you might want to ride instead of sitting in the cart," Francis explained, indicating the second horse, a gentle-looking mare. "She's steady as they come. Name's Daisy." Catherine hesitated, glancing at Emma. "I've never ridden with a baby before." Francis produced a length of sturdy fabric. "My sister used this to carry her youngest while she worked. It ties around you and holds the baby secure against your chest." Catherine accepted the makeshift sling with gratitude. With Francis's help, she fashioned it into a carrier for Emma, who seemed content enough with the arrangement. Then, with Francis's steadying hand at her elbow, she mounted Daisy, comfortable. Francis asked, his concerned gaze moving from Catherine to Emma and back. Catherine adjusted her seat slightly and nodded. "Yes, we're fine." Francis mounted his own horse, took the cart's lead rope, and with a final nod toward the cabin, they set off toward Clearwater and Catherine's new life. The journey was slow but steady. Francis set a pace that was comfortable for Catherine and Emma, stopping frequently to rest and tend to the baby's needs. They spoke little at first, each lost in their own thoughts, but as the miles passed, conversation began to flow more naturally. Francis told her about his life as a cowboy, working cattle drives across the territories, seeing parts of the country most people only dreamed about. "It's a good life for a single man," he said, "but it gets lonely sometimes, always moving, never putting down roots." "Is that what you want?" Catherine asked. "Roots?" Francis was quiet for a long moment. "I think I do," he finally admitted. "Getting older now, starting to think about what comes next. A man can't ride the range forever." Catherine understood. Thomas had felt the same way, which was why they'd homesteaded instead of continuing to work for others. The desire for something of one's own was powerful. "What about you?" Francis asked. "What did you dream of before life brought you out west?" Catherine smiled, remembering her girlhood fantasies. "I wanted to be a teacher. I even had a year of schooling for it back in Pennsylvania. But then I met Thomas and—" She shrugged. "His dreams became mine." "You could still teach," Francis suggested. "Clearwater's growing." They might need a school teacher before long. The thought had never occurred to Catherine. With Thomas, it had always been about the homestead, about building something from nothing. The idea that she might pursue her own ambitions seemed almost foreign. "Perhaps," she said thoughtfully. "Once Emma's a bit older." They camped that night beneath a stand of cottonwoods alongside a small creek. Francis insisted that Catherine and Emma take the tent he'd brought while he slept under the stars. "I prefer it that way," he assured her when she protested. "Can't sleep right with a roof over my head anymore, even a canvas one." As Catherine settled Emma for the night, she watched through the tent flap as Francis tended the fire, his profile strong against the flickering light. There was something comforting about his presence, a sense of security she hadn't felt since Thomas left. The next day's journey brought them within sight of Clearwater by mid-afternoon. The small frontier town was a welcome sight after the isolation of the homestead. Buildings lined a single main street, with houses and smaller structures spreading outward. A church steeple rose above the other rooftops, and the hustle and bustle of people going about their business gave the place a vitality that Catherine had almost forgotten existed. Francis led them directly to the Stagecoach Way station, a substantial building at the edge of town with a large stable and yard behind it. A portly man with mutton-chop whiskers emerged as they approached. "Mr. Sullivan," he called, raising a hand in greeting. "Right on time, as promised." Francis dismounted and helped Catherine down from Daisy. "Mr. Hodges, this is Mrs. Catherine Winters and her daughter, Emma." Mr. Hodges removed his hat, revealing a bald pate fringed with gray hair. "Mrs. Winters, my deepest condolences for your loss. Your husband was a brave man." Catherine nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Hodges." "I've had the rooms prepared, as we discussed," Mr. Hodges continued, addressing Francis again. "My wife has aired out the linens and made sure everything is suitable for a lady and child." Francis smiled. "I knew you would, Mr. Hodges." Mr. Hodges turned back to Catherine. "The position is yours if you want it, Mrs. Winters. Room and board for you and the little one, plus a small wage." Duties include cooking for the stage passengers, never more than 10 at a time, keeping the guest rooms clean, and general housekeeping. My wife will show you everything you need to know. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the sudden reality of her new situation. That's very generous, Mr. Hodges. I accept and will work hard to earn my keep. I've no doubt of that, Mr. Hodges said kindly. Sullivan here speaks highly of you, and he's not a man to exaggerate. Francis looked slightly embarrassed. Just told the truth is all, Mr. Hodges chuckled. Well, let's get you settled, Mrs. Winters. The next stage isn't due until tomorrow morning, so you'll have time to rest and learn the ropes before you're thrown into the thick of it. As Mr. Hodges led them inside, Catherine was relieved to find the way station clean and well maintained. Mrs. Hodges, a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly and immediately took to Emma, cooing over the baby while Mr. Hodges showed Catherine to her rooms, a small but comfortable bedroom with an adjoining sitting area, both simply but adequately furnished. It's not fancy, Mrs. Hodges apologized, but it's private and warm. It's perfect, Catherine assured her, genuinely pleased with the arrangement. After the isolation of the homestead, the bustle of the way station felt comforting rather than overwhelming. Once Catherine's belongings had been brought in from the cart, Francis lingered awkwardly in the doorway of her new quarters. Well, he said, hat in hand, I suppose you're all set now. Catherine felt a surprising pang at the thought of him leaving. Will you be staying in Clearwater tonight? Francis nodded. Got a room at the boarding house. Heading out tomorrow, though. Got a job waiting for me at a ranch near Cheyenne. I see, Catherine said, trying to mask her disappointment. Of course he was moving on, that was his life. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, Francis. No need for thanks, he said, his gaze warm. I'm just glad I could help. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Perhaps, Catherine ventured, you could join us for dinner tonight. I'm sure the Hodges wouldn't mind, and it would be nice to properly say goodbye. Francis's face brightened. I'd like that very much. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair. Mrs. Hodges proved to be an excellent cook, and Mr. Hodges an entertaining host with stories of the various characters who passed through the way station. Francis fit right in, charming the Hodges with tales of his adventures on the cattle trails. Catherine, watching him across the table, felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hearty meal. In just a few days, Francis Sullivan had changed her life completely, rescuing her and Emma from certain death and giving them a chance at a new beginning. The thought of him riding away the next day left an emptiness she hadn't expected to feel so soon after losing Thomas. After dinner, Francis asked if Catherine would like to take a short walk through town before retiring. With Mrs. Hodges happily volunteering to watch Emma, Catherine accepted. The evening was cool but pleasant as they strolled down Clearwater's Main Street. Lanterns glowed in windows, and the saloon at the far end of town spilled light and raucous laughter into the night. Francis kept a respectful distance as they walked, but his presence beside her felt natural, comfortable. It's a nice town, Francis observed. Growing but not too wild, good place to raise a child. Catherine nodded. It seems so. I'm grateful for the opportunity here. They reached the end of the street and turned back, their pace slowing as if by mutual agreement, neither wanting the walk to end. Catherine, Francis said finally, his voice low. I want you to know that He trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. What is it? She prompted gently. Francis stopped walking, turning to face her directly. In the dim light from a nearby window, his expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. I know it's too soon. You're grieving, and you've been through more than anyone should have to endure. But I can't leave tomorrow without telling you that I've come to care for you and Emma, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances. Catherine's heart quickened. Francis, he held up a hand. Please let me finish. I'm not asking anything of you. I know you need time. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to come back and call on you properly. The sincerity in his voice moved Catherine deeply. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Francis assured her. Just know that I'll be thinking of you, and if you ever need anything at all, you can send word to the Triple R Ranch near Cheyenne, and I'll come." Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. I would like it if you came back someday." Francis's smile was like sunrise breaking across his weathered face. "Then I will, you have my word." As they walked back to the way station, a comfortable silence between them, Catherine felt a strange peace settle over her. The future stretched before her, uncertain but no longer bleak. She had lost much, but perhaps, in time, she might find something new to cherish. Francis departed the next morning as promised, tipping his hat to Catherine and touching Emma's cheek gently before mounting his horse. "Remember," he said, "Triple R Ranch, any time." Catherine nodded, holding Emma close. "Safe travels, Francis." As she watched him ride away, Catherine knew with certainty that this wasn't a final goodbye. Something had begun between them, fragile as a seedling but with the potential to grow strong. Time would tell where it might lead. The months that followed were busy ones for Catherine. The work at the way station was demanding but satisfying. She quickly learned the routines and took pride in providing hot meals and clean rooms for weary travelers. Emma thrived in the sociable environment, doted on by the Hodges and cooed over by passengers. The small wage Catherine earned allowed her to save a little each month and occasionally purchase small luxuries like a new dress for Emma or a book for herself. Winter came and went, harsh but manageable within the solid walls of the way station. Spring brought new travelers as the weather improved, and with them, news from across the territories. It was a stage driver who first mentioned Francis Sullivan again, nearly 6 months after Catherine had last seen him. "Ran into that cowboy friend of yours at Fort Laramie," the driver mentioned casually as Catherine served him coffee. "Sullivan said to tell you he hasn't forgotten his promise." Catherine's heart fluttered at the message. "He's well then, fit as a fiddle," the driver confirmed. "Foreman at the Triple R now, from what I hear. Owner's getting on in years, looking for someone to take over eventually. Sullivan's got a good reputation." The news pleased Catherine more than she cared to admit. She had thought of Francis often during the long winter nights, wondering where he was and if he ever thought of her and Emma. The message, simple as it was, confirmed that she remained in his thoughts as he did in hers. Summer came, bringing with it Catherine's first anniversary at the way station. Mr. Hodges marked the occasion by increasing her wages, citing her excellent work and the station's improved reputation under her care. Passengers specifically mentioned the good food and clean rooms in their reports to the company, he told her proudly. "You're an asset to us, Mrs. Winters." The compliment warmed Catherine, reinforcing her growing confidence in her abilities. She was no longer the helpless woman Francis had found starving in a remote cabin. She was self-sufficient, respected, and building a good life for herself and Emma, who was now walking and beginning to form words. It was a sweltering August afternoon when Catherine, hanging laundry in the yard behind the station, looked up to see a familiar figure on horseback approaching. Her heart leapt to her throat as she recognized Francis, his broad shoulders and easy seat on horseback unmistakable even at a distance. He dismounted at the gate, removing his hat as he approached. "Catherine," he said simply, his voice as warm as she remembered. "Francis," she replied, suddenly aware of her work-worn hands and faded dress. "I didn't know you were coming." His smile was apologetic. "I should have sent word ahead." "I hope it's not a bad time." "No, not at all," she assured him quickly. "Emma will be so excited to see you. She's napping now, but I've come to see you both," Francis said, his gaze steady on hers. "I've kept my distance, given you time, but I couldn't stay away any longer. I had to know if you might be ready for that proper calling I mentioned." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I think I might be," she admitted softly. The joy that spread across Francis's face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. "I've got 2 weeks' leave from the ranch," he said. "With your permission, I'd like to spend it here in Clearwater, calling on you and Emma properly, getting to know you better." "I'd like that very much," Catherine said, her heart lighter than it had been in a very long time. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of shared meals, evening walks, and Sunday drives in a buggy Francis rented from the livery. Emma, now nearly 16 months old, took to Francis immediately, demanding up, whenever she saw him and falling asleep against his broad chest during their outings. Catherine found herself falling in love with the way Francis listened when she spoke, truly interested in her thoughts and dreams. He encouraged her ambition to someday teach, even bringing her a catalog from a women's college in Denver that offered correspondence courses for teacher certification. "You could do it," he said earnestly. "Study in your spare time, get your certificate. Clearwater will need a proper school soon with all the families moving in." His belief in her abilities touched Catherine deeply. Thomas had loved her, but he had never truly seen her as having dreams separate from his own. Francis seemed to understand instinctively that she needed goals of her own to pursue. As his 2 weeks drew to a close, Francis invited Catherine for a special dinner at Clearwater's only restaurant, a small but respectable establishment that catered to the town's growing middle class. Mrs. Hodges happily agreed to watch Emma, winking knowingly at Catherine as she helped her prepare for the evening. "He's going to ask you to marry him," Mrs. Hodges predicted as she pinned Catherine's hair. "Mark my words." Catherine blushed but didn't deny the possibility. The idea of becoming Francis's wife filled her with nervous anticipation rather than dread or uncertainty. In just 2 weeks of proper courtship built on the foundation of trust and respect established months before she had come to love him with a steadiness and depth that surprised her. Francis called for her promptly at 7, dressed in his best clothes which, while still simple, were clean and well-pressed. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of Catherine in her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his offered arm. "You're quite handsome yourself." The restaurant was quiet, with only a few other diners present. Francis had reserved a table by the window, where the late summer sunset cast a golden glow over the white tablecloth. They talked easily through the meal, comfortable in each other's company in a way that felt both new and familiar. As they finished dessert, apple pie with fresh cream, Francis reached across the table to take Catherine's hand. "Catherine," he began, his voice low and serious, "these past 2 weeks have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted, squeezing his fingers gently. "I know it hasn't been long in the traditional sense," Francis continued, "but I feel like I've known you for years. What started that day I found you and Emma in that cabin has grown into something I never expected to find at my age." Catherine smiled, encouraging him to continue. "I love you, Catherine," Francis said simply. "I love Emma too, as if she were my own. I want to be a father to her, a husband to you. I want to build a life with you both." He reached into his pocket with his free hand and produced a small velvet box. "I'm not a wealthy man, but I've saved carefully. The foreman's position at the Triple R comes with a good house, plenty big enough for a family." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Catherine Winters, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had anticipated the proposal, hearing the words aloud filled Catherine with a joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Francis, I would be honored to be your wife." Francis's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I know you might want a longer engagement," he said. "Time to prepare, to be sure." Catherine shook her head, surprising herself with her certainty. "I don't need more time, Francis. I know my heart, and it belongs to you." They agreed to marry in 1 month's time, allowing Francis to make arrangements at the ranch and Catherine to prepare for the move. Mr. and Mrs. Hodges, though sad to lose her, were delighted by the news and promised to help in any way they could. "We'll need to find someone to replace you, Mr. Hodges said, "but your happiness comes first." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Clearwater. Catherine was touched by how many people came forward with congratulations and offers of help. The town had become her community in ways she hadn't fully appreciated until then. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Francis returned to the Triple R to ready the house and make arrangements for their arrival, but he wrote faithfully every few days, his letters full of plans and promises that made Catherine's heart swell with anticipation. On a crisp October morning, Catherine stood in the small church in Clearwater, Emma in Mrs. Hodges's arms as she prepared to begin her new life. She wore a cream-colored dress that the women of the town had helped her make, with tiny pearl buttons down the back and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, with a crown of autumn flowers in place of a veil. Francis waited at the altar, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration as Catherine walked toward him on Mr. Hodges's arm. The older man had offered to give her away, a gesture that had moved Catherine to tears when he proposed it. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Catherine and Francis exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not only to love and cherish each other, but to build a family together, with Emma as its heart. When Francis knelt to include Emma in a special promise, lifting the toddler into his arms and vowing to be the father she deserved, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The reception that followed at the way station was a joyous affair, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Catherine, watching Francis dance with Emma in his arms, felt a completeness she had never known before. This was what family meant, not just blood ties, but the bonds of love and choice that held people together through all of life's challenges. As evening fell, Catherine and Francis prepared to depart for the Triple R. Their wagon was loaded with Catherine's belongings, and a comfortable bed had been prepared in the back for Emma to sleep during the journey. The goodbyes were emotional but not sad. Catherine promised to write often, and Mrs. Hodges extracted a promise that they would bring Emma back to visit regularly. As they pulled away from Clearwater, Emma sleeping peacefully and Francis's steady hands on the reins, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led her here had been fraught with hardship and loss, but it had brought her to a place of profound joy and possibility. "Happy?" Francis asked, glancing at her with a smile that still made her heart skip. "More than I ever thought possible," Catherine replied truthfully, resting her head against his shoulder as the wagon rolled forward into their future together. The journey to the Triple R ranch took 3 days, with Francis setting an easy pace to accommodate Emma's needs. They stayed at small inns along the way, reveling in their new status as husband and wife. Emma adjusted to the travel remarkably well, fascinated by the changing scenery and delighted by the attention she received from her new father. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked the Triple R, Catherine gasped at the sight. The ranch spread across a verdant valley, with the main house and outbuildings clustered near a sparkling creek. Cattle grazed on the rolling grasslands, and in the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Welcome home," Francis said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. The ranch owner, Richard Reynolds, and his wife, Martha, greeted them warmly at the main house before showing them to the foreman's house, a sturdy, 2-story structure with a wide porch and plenty of room for their small family to grow. "We've had it cleaned and aired out," Martha explained as she showed Catherine around, "and I took the liberty of stocking the pantry with essentials. I remember how overwhelming it can be to start fresh in a new place." Catherine was touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds." "You've been so kind." "Martha, please," the older woman insisted. "We're practically family now. Richard thinks of Francis as the son we never had." The first weeks at the Triple R were a period of adjustment for Catherine and Emma. The rhythm of ranch life was different from that of the way station, with earlier mornings and the constant presence of cowboys and ranch hands. Francis's duties kept him busy from dawn till dusk most days, but he always made time for his new family, reading to Emma before bed and spending quiet evenings with Catherine after the child was asleep. Catherine found her place quickly, establishing their home and gradually taking on responsibilities that Martha Reynolds, who was getting on in years, was happy to relinquish. She learned to manage the household accounts, to oversee the cooking for the ranch hands during roundup, and to navigate the complex social dynamics of the ranch community. As winter settled over the Triple R, bringing shorter days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news delighted Francis beyond measure. "A baby," he marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Catherine smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Emma will be a wonderful big sister." "She will," Francis agreed, "and you'll be an even more wonderful mother than you already are." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. By spring, Catherine's condition was obvious, and Emma, now nearly 2, was fascinated by the idea of a baby growing in her mother's belly. "Baby?" she would ask, patting Catherine's rounded stomach with her small hand. "Yes, sweetheart," Catherine would reply, "your little brother or sister." As Catherine's time grew near, Martha Reynolds arranged for the best midwife in the county to stay at the ranch. "No chances," she declared firmly when Catherine suggested it might be an unnecessary expense. "You're family now, and we take care of our own." On a warm July evening, with a summer storm brewing on the horizon, Catherine went into labor. Francis paced anxiously outside their bedroom while the midwife and Martha attended to Catherine inside. Emma, confused by the commotion, was entertained by Richard Reynolds, who showed a surprising aptitude for keeping a toddler occupied during a crisis. After 6 hours of labor far easier than Emma's birth had been, Catherine delivered a healthy baby boy. When Francis was finally allowed into the room, his eyes filled with tears at the sight of Catherine holding their son. "He's perfect," Francis whispered, perching carefully on the edge of the bed and gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Would you like to hold your son?" Catherine asked, her heart swelling with love for the man who had saved her and Emma from destitution and given them both a new life filled with love and security. Francis accepted the swaddled infant with reverent care, cradling him as if he were made of the finest porcelain. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." "We should name him," Catherine said softly. "I was thinking Thomas Francis Sullivan, if that's all right with you." Francis looked up, his eyes shining with emotion. "After your first husband, are you sure?" Catherine nodded. "He gave me Emma." "He deserves to be remembered, and Francis after you, the man who has given us everything else." "Thomas Francis Sullivan," Francis repeated, testing the name. "It's a good, strong name, a name to live up to." The family settled into a new rhythm with baby Thomas's arrival. Emma, initially jealous, quickly took to her role as big sister, proudly helping Catherine with the baby and announcing to everyone who would listen, "That's my brother." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The Triple R prospered under Richard Reynolds's guidance and Francis's capable management. When Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after Catherine and Francis's wedding, he left the ranch to Francis, with provisions for Martha's continued comfort for the remainder of her days. "He always said you were the son he never had," Martha told Francis at the reading of the will. "He wanted the Triple R to stay in the family." The responsibility of ownership brought new pressures, but Francis rose to the challenge admirably. Catherine supported him in every way she could, managing the household accounts with increasing skill and serving as his sounding board for major decisions. Their family grew again 2 years after Thomas's birth with the arrival of twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca. The foreman's house, once spacious for their small family, now rang with the laughter and occasional squabbles of 4 children. Emma, now 7, was a thoughtful, intelligent child who reminded Catherine of Thomas in her quiet determination and curiosity about the world. Young Thomas, at 4, was his father's shadow, following Francis around the ranch whenever permitted and showing an early aptitude for horsemanship. The twins, at 2, were bundles of energy who kept Catherine busy from sunrise to sunset. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children were finally asleep, Francis took Catherine's hand in his. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The path your life has taken." Catherine looked at him, surprised by the question. "Regret what?" "All of it," Francis said, gesturing vaguely. "Marrying Thomas, moving west, the hardships you endured. If you could go back and change things, would you? Catherine considered the question seriously, knowing Francis deserved an honest answer. I can't regret the path that led me to you and the life we've built together, she said finally. Yes, there was pain and loss along the way, but look at what came of it, Emma, Thomas, the twins. This home, this life. How could I regret any of the steps that brought me here? Francis smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. I thank God every day for leading me to that cabin, he said, even if I was just a cowboy with a sack of food and a smile. You were never just anything, Francis Sullivan, Catherine said firmly, leaning over to kiss him softly. You were exactly what Emma and I needed, exactly when we needed it most. As they sat together in the growing twilight, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young widow starving in a remote cabin to the confident woman, she was now wife, mother, respected member of the community. She had traveled a path she could never have imagined. Life on the frontier was never easy. There would be more challenges ahead, more joys and sorrows to navigate together. But with Francis beside her and their children sleeping safely under their roof, Catherine knew she had found something precious beyond measure. Not just survival, but a life rich with love, purpose, and possibility. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Francis squeezed her hand gently. I love you, Catherine Sullivan, he said, his voice still holding the same warmth and sincerity as it had that day in Clearwater when he had proposed. And I love you, Francis Sullivan, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as they gazed out at the land that was now their legacy to their children. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the gentle Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and promise across the ranch they now called home. Catherine smiled, content in the knowledge that sometimes the darkest moments of life could lead to the brightest futures, and that sometimes salvation could arrive in the form of a cowboy with a sack and a smile.